This is Noctua's L12Sx77. It's a low-profile cooler that's 77 millimeters tall. It works very well, and it's very impressive. But gotta show you something better today. And this is coming up on the horizon. I think it looks better too. Welcome to Machines and More. So we saw this one at Computex recently, and a big thanks to IE Cooling for getting this sample by so quickly. It's not the one actually off the show floor. Some of you might think that I just jacked it and ran away, but another one of the pre-production units was ready for testing. So while we are a little bit a ways from the retail availability, we're actually really fortunate to get a sneak peek here, and it's a very promising as you'll see. So I did want to take a look and give a little bit of feedback, and hopefully they can fine-tune some of those things prior to the release. So just a refresher, they're calling this one the IS-77-XT EX is what I saw on the show floor, and it is a 77 millimeter tall low-profile cooler that comes equipped with a slim 120 millimeter fan underneath the heatsink. The fan underneath the heatsink does have noise implications for a case like the Terra, which in my experience, a fan close to this fluted cut side panel results in amplified sound typically. You're not going to get that with this. You don't get that with the L12Sx77. This one is the black version, and I recall they might have had a white one coming, so I got to check on that. But either way, I think it looks really good in here. The EX indicates that they have this set up out of the box to exhaust out the heatsink, which, at least in my experience with SFF cases, is a little bit odd. And this actually, as you'll see, has a big implication for the performance in this case. Now, what ID told me was that in their testing, intake is louder, and I'll go over my testing results on this shortly. So intake versus exhaust setup out of the box usually isn't that big of a deal. The user can just flip the fan as needed, and the designation really is just how it's set up out of the box. You got 6 heat pipes here on a 430 gram heatsink, nickel-plated copper base plate. You have roughly 40 millimeters between the base plate and the underside of the fan. Overall, it's a very sharp-looking cooler, and I wanted to set up in a build to match. So for my testing, I set this one up in this all-black Fractal Terra build. This motherboard here is the Asus B860-I board that's equipped with an Intel 245K. Cooler Master is V1100 SFX, and to round out this black build, I'm adding something new here. This is the Acer Predator GM7000 SSD, 2 terabytes here. It's a very fast Gen 4 M.2 drive, measured in at 7100 read and 6600 megabytes per second write. So definitely go check this drive out. The way I oriented the cooler heatsink, it overhangs the rear IO board heatsink, and this ensemble actually clears it just fine. The 40 millimeters is absolutely adequate, and the heat pipes do not interfere with the RAM, as you can see. So the other way I could have run this was rotate it 90 degrees and have the heat pipe bends on the bottom. Either way, the clearance is okay here, and I think, like I mentioned, that 40 millimeters is absolutely adequate here. So to fit a 77 millimeter heatsink in this case, you do have to have the case set up in divider position 1, and that means the GPU is limited to a 2-slot card. I went ahead and popped in the only black 2-slot card I have, which is the EVGA3060 Ti XC. It's an older card, but the card doesn't matter too much for the testing today, as we're mainly focusing on CPU thermals. But I do hope to update this build shortly with something a little bit more recent, so do stay tuned on this one. At the bottom, we have the Noctua Chromax NFA 12x25 G1. We have to say G1 because the G2 is around now, although the Chromax version is not here yet. That's still pending for that fan. I have the fan set up to exhaust. Empirically, for SFF sandwich style cases, that is the direction that makes sense, as most builders will have an air-cooled GPU in the build, and this fan will help encourage the makeup air to come in through the side panels to feed both the GPU and the PSU. And as long as you have your air cooler intaking as well, that will help it also. So because of that, I'm not switching the direction of this fan for the testing between intake versus exhaust. And there's no sense to fight the graphics card and your power supply. So I started by testing in the stock exhaust mode. At 1770 RPM, I got decent temps on the 245K, and this is at 136 watts package power here. Upping the full speed at 2000 RPM, the temps improved further. So ID told me in their testing that the intake was louder, and I was a little bit curious because I know with how airflow works in the Terra that regardless of the sound, the intake actually has to be better performance-wise. So I went ahead and flipped the fan, which surprisingly wasn't that straightforward because the intake side of this particular fan has counterbore holes, but the exhaust side doesn't. So the screws that came with it were too short. So because I didn't have the right length, I had to grind down the frame a little bit. Sorry, ID. So for the production model, hopefully a separate set of screws can be included if users want to flip the fan. For the comparison, I wanted to keep the RPMs the same, but I did also want to note that the noise level for intake actually measured in slightly lower than exhaust at the same RPM. And I tested a few levels with the panels open and closed. And in fact, the intake mode was generally about 0.4 dBA quieter. But as you will hear in the noise samples, the frequency does sound a little bit different. Now, it's possible some could perceive intake as being slightly louder, but it actually does not measure that way on a meter. One other note is that open and closed for intake did not have a meaningful impact on noise. With an exhaust mode, the closed panel was sometimes a little bit quieter until you reached full speed. Either way, this is fine, and I note this because with coolers that have the fan on top in the Terra, it's actually not uncommon to see a few decibels worth of noise amplification when closing the panel. So here, fractions of a decibel one way or another is not a major issue. So I'm not questioning ID's internal testing where they had intake as louder because they might not have tested in the Fractal Terra, but I do think for this particular height segment, the Terra is of particular interest, and it is the SFF case to test in for this height. Running the same test, though, we get some downright incredible improvements at the same RPMs, because the airflow is now in sync with the case fan, which is only running at 900 RPM. But 3.5 degrees is a very big swing. On top of that, like as mentioned, intake is slightly quieter. I did run gaming tests as well at a lower 1400 RPM. The intake is still hugely better. Your GPU temps don't see a big swing, but if you're exhausting through the cooler, there's going to be that tendency to pull some of that GPU's heat out through the heatsink, so that has a pretty big impact on the CPU thermals. So I am confident that for sandwich style cases, especially the Terra, you're going to want to run this cooler as an intake. Even if you perceive the noise quality of intake as being slightly louder, you could in fact just run lower fan speeds for the same performance versus exhaust, and then you'd be at a lower noise level, absolutely. And comparing our intake results on a noise normalized basis against the, this guy here, the L12S x77, you can see just how good this cooler is. It's 3.7 degrees ahead of the Noctua, which is at full speed here. And I did retest the ID IS-77-XT, which I swapped in the same Noctua fan at the same RPM. It is slightly louder here because of the interaction with the side panel, because that setup has the fan on the outside, and that impacts the noise. But either way, the IS-77 completely smokes it. So normally with these types of coolers and heavy CPU loads, you will end up with full fan speeds anyway, so there's not going to be too much of an impetus to test more moderate RPMs. But we're actually not at full speed yet on the IS-77, so we can go up to 2000 RPM, and that adds about 2.5 decibels, and we improve further. I still wanted to give a few sound samples for reference, intake versus exhaust, even though this is not a production version, the retail version just yet. So when the time comes, things may change a little bit, but I didn't want to leave this section blank, so here goes. I think if users are picking the right CPU to go with this, then you can run at 1800 RPM and then just reserve some headroom as needed. And I would recommend this cooler for CPUs like the 245K like I have here, or if you have a 13600K or 14600K from previous Intel gens. On the AMD side, you can run it with the 9700X. You should be able to run at the 105 watt CTDP. This would also be perfect for the 9800X 3D. So I'd say as long as your full CPU load package power is less than 140 watts, this will be a very appropriate cooler for it. And I actually really like this type of Terra build versus putting a big thick GPU on one side and a small cooler on this side, since this one really allows you to give proper cooling for the CPU. And there are still plenty of good, even great 2-slot cards out there to choose from. So it's more of, picking the right components for your build. Pricing is promising also. They told me they're targeting $45 US. So the Noctua L12Sx77 costs $80 right now. So you could almost get 2 of these for the price of that, right? So yeah, IS-77 performance and price, it's a win-win. And in my opinion, the matte finish, the looks here, it's just a perfect match for the Black Terra. So I think we're closer to win-win-win.
Or win-win.
Win.
Yes, thank you, Pam.
So yeah, excited for the release, excited to see how they'll tune this one before the retail version arrives. If you liked this one, please give a like. Make sure you're subscribed. Components are linked down below, and a big thanks for watching today.